Europe's past isn't just buried in ruins, it's written in our DNA. Every cell in our body carries the echoes of migrations, lost civilizations, and even ancient species that vanished thousands of years ago. For centuries, historians relied on myths and artifacts to reconstruct the past, but now, with cutting-edge genetic technology, we can uncover hidden secrets once thought lost forever. Scientists have extracted DNA from ancient remains, and what they found is rewriting history. The origins of modern Europeans aren't as simple as once believed. Beneath the surface lies a story of survival, adaptation, and unexpected connections that stretch far beyond Europe's borders. The first Europeans arrived in a world vastly different from today. Around 45,000 years ago, groups of hunter-gatherers ventured into the frozen landscapes of Ice Age Europe. These early humans, known as the Western hunter-gatherers, were resilient survivors who endured extreme climates, competing with Neanderthals for resources. Surprisingly, DNA evidence shows that early Europeans had dark skin and strikingly light eyes, a combination rarely seen today. But these weren't the only people shaping the genetic landscape of the continent. For thousands of years, small bands of hunter-gatherers thrived across Europe. But around 8,500 years ago, everything changed. A new wave of migrants from the Near East, early farmers from Anatolia, swept into Europe. These people brought agriculture, permanently altering the way humans lived. But they didn't just bring farming. They carried new genes that would reshape European biology. Their arrival introduced lighter skin tones, changes in immunity, and even traits linked to digestion, including the earliest signs of lactose tolerance. The genetic shift was so dramatic that within a few thousand years, much of Europe's population carried their DNA. But this was only the beginning of Europe's genetic transformation. In 2012, scientists analyzing European DNA stumbled upon something strange. There was an unexplained genetic component that didn't match either hunter-gatherers or early farmers. This mysterious ghost population had to exist, but no one knew who they were. Then, in 2014, a breakthrough occurred. Researchers studying ancient remains from Siberia identified a boy buried near Lake Baikal over 20,000 years ago. His DNA was unlike anything seen before, closely related to Native Americans, but also linked to modern Europeans. This discovery confirmed the existence of the ancient North Eurasians, a long-lost population that once roamed across the vast steppes of Eurasia. Their genes made their way into Europe, blending with early populations and leaving a permanent mark on the continent's genetic makeup. These early migrations laid the foundation for European genetics, but one event changed everything: the arrival of the Yamnaya. Around 5,000 years ago, these nomadic horse riders from the Eurasian steppe stormed into Europe, bringing a cultural and genetic revolution. With their mastery of horseback riding and warfare, they spread rapidly, replacing up to 80% of the local population in some regions. But they didn't just bring new genes, they brought language. The Yamnaya are now believed to be the ancestors of the Proto-Indo-European speakers, the group that gave rise to languages spoken by nearly half the world's population today, including English, Spanish, and Hindi. Their DNA shaped modern Europeans, influencing height, immune responses, and even cognitive traits. What makes this story even more astonishing is that genetic traces of these ancient groups are still present in people today. Some regions, particularly in isolated parts of Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, hold unique genetic markers that may be the last remnants of lost civilizations like the Druids. Some researchers believe these populations inherited traits linked to memory, intelligence, and even resistance to diseases that devastated other communities. Could the secrets of Europe's ancient past still be hidden in the bloodlines of modern Europeans? The study of ancient DNA has opened a portal into the past, revealing that history wasn't a simple progression, but a continuous reshaping of populations. Every migration, every adaptation, every lost civilization left a genetic footprint that still influences us today. What other secrets might be waiting to be uncovered? Farming changed everything. Before its arrival, Europe was a land of vast forests and roaming hunter-gatherers, small bands of people who had lived off the land for tens of thousands of years. But 8,500 years ago, a new wave of migrants swept into the continent, early farmers from Anatolia. They didn't just bring agriculture. They carried new technologies, beliefs, and even diseases that would permanently reshape the genetic makeup of Europe. The transformation was so profound that within a few thousand years, these early farmers had almost entirely replaced the hunter-gatherers in many regions. Their arrival wasn't just a shift in lifestyle, it was an evolutionary turning point. The genetic traces of these ancient farmers still shape modern Europeans. One of the most striking changes they introduced was skin pigmentation. The first Europeans had dark skin, but the Anatolian farmers carried genes that gradually led to lighter skin tones, an adaptation that helped them produce more vitamin D in northern climates. But that wasn't the only evolutionary shift. With the introduction of farming, humans began living in closer proximity to domesticated animals, creating an environment where new diseases could spread rapidly. Over time, natural selection favored genes that strengthened the immune system, making early farmers more resistant to infections that would have devastated hunter-gatherer populations. For centuries, it was believed that Europe's genetic story ended there, a mixture of hunter-gatherers and early farmers. But new research has revealed that another major transformation occurred. Around 5,000 years ago, a group of nomadic herders known as the Yamnaya stormed into Europe from the Eurasian steppe. They weren't just warriors, they were carriers of a genetic mutation that would change the course of human history: lactose tolerance. While early farmers had domesticated cattle, most adults couldn't digest milk. The Yamnaya, however, had evolved the ability to process lactose, giving them a vital survival advantage during food shortages. Today, this genetic trait is widespread across Europe, a direct result of Yamnaya ancestry. But that wasn't the only way evolution shaped European genetics. As populations moved and mixed, natural selection continued to refine traits suited for survival. In Northern Europe, people with genetic markers for increased height had an advantage, while in Southern Europe, early farmers underwent selection for shorter stature. These differences, visible even today, were shaped by thousands of years of adaptation to different environments. The forces of natural selection also influence brain function. Some of the genes inherited from ancient populations are linked to cognitive abilities, memory retention, and even resistance to neurological diseases. But not all genetic legacies were beneficial. Some traits that once provided an advantage, such as immune system adaptations, are now linked to modern diseases like multiple sclerosis and Alzheimer's. These conditions, which are more common in certain European populations, are the unintended consequences of evolutionary pressures from thousands of years ago. Understanding these genetic shifts isn't just about looking into the past. It's about uncovering the hidden forces that still shape us today. The genes of ancient farmers, warriors, and survivors live on in modern Europeans, influencing everything from physical traits to disease susceptibility. What other evolutionary secrets remain buried in our DNA, waiting to be discovered? For centuries, history books have traced Europe's past through the rise and fall of empires, but DNA tells a different story, one of lost civilizations, forgotten migrations, and ancient connections stretching across continents. One of the most mysterious discoveries in recent years is the existence of an ancestral population that left an invisible yet undeniable mark on Europe. For a long time, scientists couldn't explain certain genetic signatures in modern Europeans, until they found proof of a long-lost civilization buried beneath the Siberian ice. In 2014, researchers analyzing the remains of a child who died 24,000 years ago near Lake Baikal made a groundbreaking discovery. His DNA didn't match any known ancient population. It carried a unique genetic signature that linked him to both modern Europeans and Native Americans. This group, now known as the ancient North Eurasians, had once thrived across the vast tundras of northern Asia before vanishing from history. But their legacy didn't disappear. As they migrated westward, their DNA mixed with other groups, forming an essential piece of Europe's genetic puzzle. This discovery rewrote everything scientists thought they knew about prehistoric migrations. It meant that modern Europeans aren't just the descendants of early farmers and hunter-gatherers, but also of a third, long-forgotten group that once dominated the icy landscapes of the North. The ancient North Eurasians didn't just leave behind genetic traces. They influenced the course of European evolution in ways that are still being uncovered. Some of their genes appear to have played a role in immune system adaptations, allowing early Europeans to survive in harsh climates and resist deadly pathogens. Their influence wasn't limited to survival traits. There's evidence suggesting that certain cognitive functions, memory capacities, and even psychological resilience may be linked to genetic markers inherited from these ancient people. But perhaps the most astonishing revelation is that the genetic fingerprints of the ancient North Eurasians can still be found, not just in Europe, but in populations spread across Asia and even the Americas. Their descendants helped shape entire civilizations, yet for millennia, their existence remained unknown. This raises a deeper question. How many other lost civilizations are hidden in our DNA, waiting to be discovered? If a single skeleton from Siberia was enough to uncover an entire forgotten population, what else might we find as genetic technology advances? The real history of Europe isn't just about the people we remember. It's about those we've forgotten, whose legacy still lives within us. Thousands of years ago, a powerful force reshaped the genetic map of Europe. It wasn't a natural disaster, nor was it an empire expanding its borders. It was a migration so massive that it nearly erased the genetic legacy of those who had lived in Europe for millennia. This was the arrival of the Yamnaya, a group of nomadic herders from the vast Eurasian steppe, who didn't just spread their culture but transformed the very DNA of the continent. Their movement was not just a migration, it was an invasion, one that left an indelible mark on modern Europeans. Before their arrival, Europe was already home to two dominant groups: the hunter-gatherers who had survived since the Ice Age, and the early farmers who introduced agriculture. But around 5,000 years ago, everything changed. The Yamnaya, expert horse riders and warriors, surged westward in an unstoppable wave. In many regions, their DNA replaced nearly 80% of the existing population, an event so dramatic that it altered the course of European history. But who were the Yamnaya? Unlike the early farmers, they were not tied to fixed settlements. Their culture revolved around mobility, herding livestock across vast open landscapes. With the horse as their greatest advantage, they moved quickly, covering distances that earlier populations never could. This ability to travel and conquer made them one of the most influential groups in history. One of their most lasting contributions was language. Linguists believe the Yamnaya spoke the earliest form of what would become the Indo-European languages, a family that includes everything from English and Spanish to Russian and Hindi. The words spoken by billions today can be traced back to these ancient herders, proving that their legacy is not just genetic, but cultural as well. But their impact didn't stop at language. The Yamnaya carried genes that shaped the physical traits of future Europeans. They introduced variations linked to increased height, changes in metabolism, and even shifts in immunity that helped populations resist new diseases. However, not all of their genetic contributions were beneficial. Some of the genes they brought are now associated with autoimmune diseases, conditions that remain more common in certain European populations today. Despite their dominance, the Yamnaya didn't remain a distinct group for long. As they spread across Europe, they mixed with the people they encountered, creating entirely new populations. Their descendants gave rise to the corded ware and bell beaker cultures, groups that carried Yamnaya DNA into Western Europe, blending the old world with the new. The story of the Yamnaya is a reminder that Europe's past was shaped not by a single people, but by waves of migration, each leaving behind traces in the DNA of those who came after. And yet, for all their influence, the Yamnaya themselves disappeared as a distinct group, absorbed into the very populations they helped create. What other lost civilizations have been hidden by the passage of time, their stories waiting to be uncovered through the secrets written in our genes? Europe's history is often told through the rise and fall of civilizations, but beneath the surface lies an even deeper story, one written in the DNA of its people. For thousands of years, genetic adaptations shaped survival, influencing everything from appearance to immunity. While wars and migrations changed the cultural landscape, natural selection was silently molding the genetic identity of Europeans in ways that would determine who thrived and who didn't. One of the most remarkable adaptations in European history is the ability to digest milk. For most of human existence, lactose, the sugar found in milk, was indigestible after childhood. But when early cattle herders began relying on dairy products, those who could process milk had a survival advantage. Over generations, the genetic mutation that allowed lactose tolerance spread rapidly, particularly in regions where dairy farming was crucial for survival. Today, this trait is common in Northern Europe, but remains rare in many other parts of the world. Another adaptation that reshaped European populations was the evolution of skin color. The first humans in Europe had darker skin, a trait inherited from their African ancestors. But as they migrated into regions with lower sunlight levels, natural selection favored lighter skin, allowing for more efficient production of vitamin D. This transition didn't happen overnight. It took thousands of years and was influenced by multiple genetic factors. The result was a gradual shift in pigmentation across the continent, with populations in the north evolving lighter skin tones, while those in the south retained more melanin. But genetics didn't just shape appearance. It played a critical role in disease resistance. As agriculture spread and people began living in larger communities, they became exposed to new pathogens. Ancient Europeans who carried immune-boosting genetic variations had a better chance of survival. Many of these genes remain active today, helping modern populations fight infections. However, not all of them have positive effects. Some genes that once protected against ancient diseases are now linked to autoimmune disorders like multiple sclerosis and Crohn's disease, particularly in Northern Europe. Even physical traits were shaped by genetic selection. In some parts of Europe, people evolved to be taller, while in others, shorter stature provided an advantage. These differences weren't random. They were the result of thousands of years of adaptation to local environments. Northern Europeans, for example, tend to be taller, a trait that has been linked to genetic factors inherited from steppe populations like the Yamnaya. Meanwhile, early Mediterranean farmers underwent selection for shorter height, possibly as an adaptation to different lifestyles and nutritional availability. The forces of evolution also extended to brain function. Certain cognitive traits, such as memory, learning ability, and problem-solving skills, were influenced by genetics over time. While intelligence itself is shaped by both environment and genes, some of the genetic markers linked to brain development have ancient origins. Studies suggest that early Europeans who carried specific genetic variants may have had advantages in survival skills, social interactions, or even long-term planning, traits that became more essential as societies grew more complex. What makes these adaptations even more fascinating is that they are still ongoing. Evolution didn't stop thousands of years ago. It continues to shape modern populations. As lifestyles change, new genetic pressures emerge, influencing everything from disease susceptibility to mental health. What will future generations inherit as humanity continues to evolve? The answer lies in the same process that shaped the past, an endless cycle of adaptation, survival, and transformation. For centuries, historians pieced together Europe's past using ancient texts, archaeological ruins, and oral traditions. But today, the most revealing evidence comes not from stone or parchment, but from the DNA hidden within our bones. Thanks to advancements in genetic research, scientists can now trace the movement of entire populations, uncovering long-forgotten migrations that reshaped the continent. And some of the most astonishing discoveries have come from analyzing the DNA of Europe's oldest inhabitants. One of the biggest breakthroughs in recent years has been the ability to extract and sequence DNA from ancient human remains. By studying the genetic material preserved in bones and teeth, scientists can map out when and where different populations moved, mixed, and even disappeared. This technology has revealed a past that is far more dynamic than once believed. Europe wasn't populated by a single, continuous lineage. It was a crossroads where cultures collided, merged, and evolved over thousands of years. Take, for example, the genetic shifts that occurred during the first millennium AD. For centuries, it was assumed that after the fall of the Roman Empire, European populations remained relatively stable. But DNA tells a different story. New research has identified multiple waves of migration during this period, as Germanic tribes, Slavic groups, and even Central Asian steppe warriors moved into different parts of Europe. These migrations didn't just change languages and traditions, they left permanent genetic imprints that can still be detected today. One of the most surprising findings has been the movement of Scandinavian ancestry into mainland Europe centuries before the Viking Age. While Vikings are well known for their raids and settlements across the continent, genetic evidence shows that people with Scandinavian roots were already present in places like Britain and Germany long before Viking longships reached their shores. Some of these individuals may have been warriors, traders, or even mercenaries fighting for the Roman army. Even more intriguing is the discovery of migrations back into Scandinavia before the Viking expansion. Ancient DNA from burial sites in Sweden suggests that groups from Central Europe moved northward during the Late Iron Age, introducing genetic diversity to the region. This challenges the traditional view of Viking ancestry and suggests that the genetic makeup of Scandinavia was shaped by migration waves both into and out of the region. But perhaps the most striking revelation from ancient DNA studies is how interconnected ancient populations were. Even in the most isolated regions, people carried genetic markers from faraway lands, proving that human movement and trade networks existed long before recorded history. A burial site in Britain, for instance, revealed an individual with Near Eastern ancestry, suggesting that migration routes stretched across entire continents thousands of years ago. These findings are reshaping our understanding of European history. What was once thought to be a continent divided into isolated cultures was, in reality, a constantly shifting landscape of migration and adaptation. And with each new genetic discovery, more questions emerge. How many more lost migrations remain undiscovered? What other civilizations have disappeared, leaving only traces in the DNA of their descendants? The answers are hidden in the past, but they are written in our genes, waiting to be uncovered. For centuries, myths and legends spoke of ancient tribes and lost civilizations, but no one knew just how much of that history was still hidden within modern Europeans. Thanks to advances in genetic research, scientists can now trace entire bloodlines, uncovering secrets buried for thousands of years. One of the most powerful tools in this investigation is the study of genetic markers, tiny segments of DNA that act as a biological fingerprint, linking people across time and space. These markers don't just tell us where our ancestors lived. They reveal the incredible journeys that shaped the modern world. One of the most significant breakthroughs in population genetics has been the identification of haplogroups, unique genetic lineages passed down through generations. These haplogroups serve as ancient roadmaps, showing where different populations originated and how they moved over thousands of years. In Europe, researchers have identified several key haplogroups that reveal an astonishingly complex history of migration and adaptation. One of the oldest and most intriguing haplogroups found in Europe is associated with the first hunter-gatherers who lived there during the Ice Age. Their descendants still exist today, particularly in regions like the Basque Country, where unique genetic signatures have been preserved for thousands of years. Unlike many other European populations, the Basques have remained genetically distinct, suggesting that they may be the closest living link to some of the continent's earliest inhabitants. But genetic markers also reveal how Europe was shaped by outside influences. The arrival of Neolithic farmers from Anatolia introduced new haplogroups, blending with the existing hunter-gatherer populations. This migration was so widespread that their genetic traces can still be found across much of southern Europe today. However, the most dramatic shift came with the arrival of the Yamnaya, who brought a completely different genetic signature from the Eurasian steppe. This event wasn't just a cultural shift. It permanently altered the genetic structure of Europe, introducing haplogroups that are still dominant in Northern and Western Europeans today. What makes these genetic markers even more fascinating is their connection to historical events. For instance, some haplogroups found in Britain and Ireland suggest early genetic links to regions as far away as the Middle East and North Africa, hinting at long-distance migrations that predate written history. Similarly, the spread of Germanic and Slavic populations during the early medieval period left clear genetic imprints that can still be traced in modern Europeans. But the study of genetic markers isn't just about uncovering the past, it's also shaping the future. By understanding how genes were passed down through generations, scientists can better trace inherited diseases, resistance to infections, and even traits linked to cognition and behavior. Some genetic markers that once provided advantages in ancient environments are now associated with modern health conditions, proving that evolution is an ongoing process. The discovery of haplogroups and genetic markers has fundamentally changed our understanding of human history. What once seemed like isolated cultures and civilizations were actually part of a vast, interconnected network of people constantly moving, mixing, and adapting. And yet, with every discovery, new questions arise. How many more genetic mysteries remain undiscovered? What other long-forgotten migrations will be revealed through the DNA of modern Europeans? The answers may already be within us, waiting to be uncovered. Europe's genetic past isn't just a story of migrations and lost civilizations. It's a map of diversity, shaped by thousands of years of adaptation to different environments. While many people think of Europe as a single genetic group, the truth is far more complex. From the Arctic tundras of Scandinavia to the sun-drenched shores of the Mediterranean, each region has a distinct genetic profile, influenced by climate, geography, and centuries of human movement. These variations aren't just differences in appearance. They reveal how populations evolved to survive in vastly different conditions. One of the most striking examples of genetic diversity in Europe is how people adapted to extreme climates. In the far north, where sunlight is scarce for much of the year, populations evolved genetic traits that allowed them to absorb and produce more vitamin D. This may explain why certain skin pigmentation genes became more common in northern Europeans, ensuring they could survive despite limited sun exposure. In contrast, Mediterranean populations, who lived under intense sunlight, retained higher levels of melanin, protecting them from UV radiation while still producing enough vitamin D to stay healthy. But environmental adaptation wasn't just about skin color. Cold climates also influence body structure. Studies show that populations living in Northern Europe tended to develop broader builds, an adaptation that helped conserve body heat in freezing temperatures. Meanwhile, those in warmer climates evolved leaner, more slender physiques to dissipate heat more efficiently. These traits weren't the result of random chance, but of thousands of years of natural selection, shaping the human form in response to the environment. Genetics also played a crucial role in diet. Different regions of Europe saw the rise of unique genetic traits that allowed populations to process local foods more efficiently. In areas where seafood was a primary food source, such as Scandinavia and the British Isles, people developed genetic variants that enhanced their ability to metabolize omega-3 fatty acids. Meanwhile, in Central and Northern Europe, where dairy farming was widespread, lactose tolerance became a dominant trait, giving those populations a nutritional advantage. In contrast, some Mediterranean populations retained genetic adaptations for digesting plant-based diets rich in olives, grains, and legumes, reflecting their agricultural heritage. Even the immune system evolved differently across Europe. In regions where people lived in dense communities with domesticated animals, exposure to infectious diseases drove genetic changes that strengthened immunity. This is why certain European populations have a higher prevalence of genes associated with resistance to bacterial and viral infections. However, these same immune adaptations sometimes had unintended consequences. Some of the genes that once protected ancient Europeans from disease are now linked to autoimmune disorders like type 1 diabetes and multiple sclerosis. Perhaps the most surprising genetic variations are those linked to brain function and behavior. While intelligence and personality are influenced by both environment and genetics, certain cognitive traits appear more frequently in specific populations, possibly as a result of adaptation to different ways of life. Studies suggest that populations with a long history of urban living may have developed different genetic tendencies in social behavior and stress response compared to those from more isolated or rural backgrounds. These regional differences prove that evolution is an ongoing process, shaping human populations in ways we are only beginning to understand. The genetics of modern Europeans are not static. They are the product of countless generations adapting to their surroundings, surviving through changing climates, diseases, and lifestyles. And as human societies continue to evolve, so too will the genes that define them. For centuries, Europe's history was told through the stories of kings, wars, and empires. But beneath the surface, a different kind of history was unfolding, one that shaped the health and survival of entire populations. Hidden within the DNA of modern Europeans are clues to ancient diseases, immunity, and the genetic risks that still affect people today. The story of disease isn't just about suffering. It's about how humans evolved to fight back, adapting over generations in ways that continue to impact modern health. One of the most striking discoveries in genetic research is how ancient diseases shaped the immune systems of different European populations. Thousands of years ago, as humans transitioned from small hunter-gatherer bands to large farming communities, their exposure to infectious diseases increased dramatically. Living in close proximity to domesticated animals introduced new pathogens, and those who carried genetic mutations that helped fight these infections had a better chance of survival. Over time, these protective genes became more common, passed down to future generations. But evolution isn't always perfect. Some of the same genetic adaptations that once helped ancient Europeans survive are now linked to modern autoimmune diseases. For example, certain immune system genes that protected early farmers from livestock-borne diseases are now associated with multiple sclerosis, a condition that disproportionately affects people of Northern European ancestry. Similarly, genetic traits that once strengthened the body's response to infections are now connected to diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease, showing how the genetic trade-offs of the past still influence human health today. Another key factor in genetic disease risk is ancestry. The mixing of populations over thousands of years introduced genetic variations that affect how different groups respond to illnesses. Research has shown that people with higher levels of Neanderthal DNA may have inherited both beneficial and harmful traits related to immunity. Some Neanderthal genes helped early humans fight viral infections, but others increased the risk of allergies and inflammatory conditions. These genetic remnants highlight the complex ways in which ancient interbreeding shaped modern health. Even genetic risk factors for neurological diseases can be traced back to prehistoric times. Recent studies suggest that genes associated with conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's may have once played a role in cognitive function and longevity. In ancient societies, individuals who lived longer and retained their memory could pass on valuable knowledge, potentially giving an advantage to their communities. However, in the modern world, where people live much longer than their prehistoric ancestors, these same genetic traits can contribute to age-related diseases. Diet and metabolism have also been shaped by genetic evolution. The ability to process different foods, store energy efficiently, and regulate insulin levels varies across European populations due to their unique ancestral diets. Some genetic mutations that helped early humans survive periods of food scarcity are now linked to an increased risk of obesity and type 2 diabetes in modern societies, where food is abundant and lifestyles have changed dramatically. The study of ancient DNA has revolutionized our understanding of how diseases emerge, evolve, and persist. The genetic legacy of past pandemics, plagues, and environmental changes can still be seen in modern European populations, shaping everything from immune responses to chronic health conditions. As researchers continue to unlock the secrets of our DNA, they may discover new ways to prevent or treat diseases that have plagued humanity for thousands of years. The past isn't just something to be studied. It's a key to understanding the future of human health. The past isn't just something we read about. It lives on within us, written into our very DNA. Every genetic marker, every inherited trait is a record of where we come from, carrying the echoes of migrations, struggles, and survival across millennia. But what if the genetic footprints of Europe's ancient inhabitants weren't just preserved in history books or archaeological sites? What if they still exist today, hidden within certain populations, waiting to be uncovered? One of the most intriguing genetic mysteries in Europe lies in the remote regions of Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. For centuries, these areas have been home to isolated communities with distinct genetic markers that set them apart from the rest of the continent. Some of these genetic signatures trace back thousands of years, connecting modern people to the earliest hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, and even the mysterious Druids of the Celtic world. But what makes these populations so unique? And why do their genetic traits differ from those found elsewhere in Europe? One reason is geography. The rugged landscapes of these regions made large-scale migrations and invasions more difficult, allowing older genetic lineages to persist with less outside influence. While much of Europe experienced continuous waves of migration, hunter-gatherers, early farmers, steppe nomads, and later Roman and Germanic expansions, certain populations in the British Isles remained relatively untouched. As a result, their DNA holds genetic signatures that have been diluted or lost elsewhere, preserving an ancient genetic heritage that stretches back thousands of years. Recent studies have found that some of these genetic markers closely resemble those of early Neolithic Europeans, suggesting a deep ancestral link to the first farming communities that arrived in Britain around 6,000 years ago. But even more surprising is the discovery of genetic traits that may have belonged to the Druids, the enigmatic priestly class of the ancient Celts. The Druids left behind no written records, but their influence on Celtic society was immense. Some researchers now believe that the genetic distinctiveness of certain populations could be a remnant of this lost civilization. But the question remains, if Druidic bloodlines still exist, what does that mean? Could certain inherited traits, such as heightened memory retention, deep connections to nature, or even specific health advantages, be linked to their ancient lineage? While no definitive answers exist, genetic research is beginning to shed light on how ancient populations shaped the physical and cognitive traits of their modern descendants. Another fascinating aspect of these genetic traces is their potential link to legendary lost civilizations. Some theories suggest that the earliest inhabitants of the British Isles might have shared ancestry with mysterious pre-Celtic groups, possibly including the Tuatha Danann, mythical beings of Irish folklore often described as having supernatural knowledge and abilities. While such claims remain speculative, the discovery of unusual genetic markers in isolated regions continues to fuel questions about Europe's ancient past. Even beyond the British Isles, certain genetic legacies remain surprisingly intact. In the Basque region of Spain, for example, researchers have found genetic patterns that are distinct from both modern European and Indo-European populations. Some believe this could be a surviving link to an ancient pre-Indo-European society, one that existed long before the migrations that shaped the rest of the continent. Ultimately, the survival of ancient genetic lineages proves that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It's still unfolding in the present. The people who carry these genetic markers are living connections to the lost civilizations that came before them, holding within their DNA the secrets of Europe's forgotten ancestors. With every new discovery, the boundaries between myth and reality continue to blur, revealing that some legends may have deeper roots in history than we ever imagined.